On the morning of June 15, 1944, in a narrow valley located 3 kilometers southwest of Carentan, France, a German forward observer, Unteroffizier Klaus Hartmann, was crouched within the shattered remnants of a stone farmhouse. He was listening intently to a sound that had become achingly familiar over the preceding 9 days, a peculiar muffled thud from a distance, yet undeniably distinct. It was the report of an American 105mm howitzer firing from a concealed location somewhere beyond the hedgerow-lined fields to the north. Hartmann had honed his ability to count. The sound itself offered no immediate solace regarding his personal survival, but what transpired in the subsequent half-minute would dictate whether he would see another hour. He pressed himself against the cold stone wall, his field telephone clutched in one hand, and began measuring time with the methodical precision ingrained in forward observers. 30 seconds. That was the critical window. 30 seconds between the report of the gun and the moment that gun would cease to exist at the very spot it had just betrayed its presence. The American M7 Priest self-propelled howitzer had introduced a tactical reality into the European theater for which German artillery doctrine was woefully unprepared. Men like Hartmann were now learning this reality firsthand, not from training manuals, but through the crucible of direct experience. The question that governed his survival, and indeed the survival of every German soldier operating within range of American artillery, was deceptively straightforward. Could one locate, communicate, and execute counterbattery fire against a target that consistently refused to remain stationary long enough to be eliminated? The M7 Priest signaled a fundamental paradigm shift in artillery philosophy, one that the American military had wholeheartedly embraced while European armies remained tethered to traditional concepts of heavy gun operations on the battlefield. German doctrine, refined over years of warfare across numerous fronts, treated artillery as a quasi-permanent fixture, establishing firing positions with meticulous attention to concealment, protection, and fields of fire. These batteries would remain in place for hours, even days, while supporting infantry actions. Any movement was deliberate, meticulously planned, and executed according to the rigorous principles governing German military operations. The Americans, however, had engineered something different. They had mounted a standard 105mm M201 howitzer onto a modified M3 tank chassis, thereby creating a vehicle capable of firing its weapon and then rapidly repositioning before retaliatory fire could arrive. The concept itself was hardly revolutionary. Self-propelled artillery had existed in various forms for decades. Yet, its execution and tactical deployment demonstrated a maturity in combined arms, thinking that compelled adversaries to fundamentally reevaluate the role of artillery in modern mobile warfare. Hartmann had already transmitted the coordinates. He had performed his duty with the exacting precision expected of German forward observers, relaying accurate information to the battery commander, who would then calculate firing solutions and direct German guns to engage the American position. But over 9 days of relentless operations in the Normandy bocage, he had also learned through bitter experience that his carefully reported coordinates too often resulted in German shells landing on empty ground, where American guns had been moments before, but were no longer. The Americans fired, displaced, and reappeared elsewhere with a velocity that seemed to defy the established norms of artillery warfare. This phenomenon was supposed to be impossible for heavy guns weighing several tons, guns that required careful positioning for accurate fire. The German army that had entered France in 1944 brought with it an artillery doctrine forged and honed through nearly 5 years of continuous combat across Europe, North Africa, and the Eastern Front. This doctrine emphasized the concentrated, massed fire of heavy guns, organized into batteries capable of delivering devastating barrages against fixed positions, enemy concentrations, and defensive lines. German artillery had earned a formidable reputation for its accuracy, its rapid response to infantry calls for fire support, and its ability to concentrate fire from multiple batteries onto single target areas with lethal effect. The fundamental assumption underpinning German artillery employment was that heavy guns operated from carefully prepared positions that balanced the competing demands of concealment from enemy observation, protection from counterbattery fire through dispersion and camouflage, and a geometric relationship to target areas that facilitated accurate fire. Movement was inherently a vulnerable period during which guns could not fire and crews were exposed. Consequently, German doctrine minimized movement, favoring positions that could support operations for extended durations. This approach had proven highly effective in the defensive engagements that characterized much of the Eastern Front in the Italian campaign, where German forces occupied prepared positions and utilized artillery to break up Soviet and Allied assaults before they could achieve a decisive breakthrough. German gunners became masters of the technical intricacies of their craft, calculating firing solutions using slide rules and charts, adjusting fire based on observer reports, and diligently maintaining the mechanical reliability of their weapons under demanding field conditions. The guns themselves, particularly the versatile 10.5mm FH-18 light-field howitzer, which formed the backbone of German divisional artillery, were well-designed pieces that offered a balance of mobility, firepower, and dependability. However, the 10.5mm leFH-18, like virtually all German artillery pieces, was a towed weapon that required either horse teams or motor transport to relocate between positions. The process of limbering a gun, moving it, and unlimbering it in a new position consumed time measured in minutes, not seconds. Even with exceptionally well-trained crews performing the evolution with practiced efficiency, the entire sequence, from ceasing fire to being ready to fire again from a new location, required a minimum of 15 to 20 minutes under ideal circumstances and frequently longer in the disorienting reality of combat. German counterbattery doctrine relied on a sophisticated system of sound ranging, flash spotting, and aerial observation to pinpoint enemy artillery positions. Forward observers like Hartmann reported enemy fire, noting the sound, estimating its direction, and providing any information they could glean. This intelligence was channeled through communication networks to artillery intelligence sections, which attempted to triangulate enemy positions and assign counter-battery missions to German guns. This system functioned effectively against adversaries who operated under similar principles, establishing positions, firing from them for extended periods, and remaining predictable enough to be located and engaged. The Americans, however, were not adhering to these assumptions. American artillery doctrine in 1944 reflected a fundamentally different philosophical approach to the deployment of heavy guns, one that prioritized mobility, flexibility, and survivability over massed fires from static emplacements. This divergence was not merely a matter of tactical preference. It represented a profound disagreement on how modern mechanized warfare ought to be conducted. The American military had embraced motorization more comprehensively than any other army, constructing an entire logistical and operational framework predicated on the assumption that vehicles, fuel, and spare parts would be available in quantities that European armies could not match. The M7 Priest, which had fired from positions north of Carentan on that June morning in 1944, was a tangible embodiment of American industrial philosophy and military thinking. The vehicle originated as an M3 medium tank chassis, the same basic platform that had carried American armored units into their initial engagements in North Africa in 1942. By 1943, the M3 tank itself had been superseded by more capable designs, but its chassis remained valuable as a versatile platform. American engineers recognized that this reliable, mobile chassis could serve as the foundation for self-propelled artillery. The conversion, while conceptually straightforward, proved demanding in execution. The tank's turret was removed entirely, and the hull was modified to accommodate the standard 10.5mm M2A1 howitzer, the same weapon employed in towed form by American field artillery battalions. The gun was mounted in an open-topped superstructure, providing the crew with ample space to operate the weapon while allowing sufficient elevation and traverse to engage targets across a wide arc. The resulting vehicle weighed approximately 22.5 tons when fully equipped with fuel, ammunition, and crew. The crew comprised 7 men, a driver, an assistant driver who also operated the hull-mounted machine gun, a commander, a gunner, and 3 ammunition handlers responsible for servicing the weapon and maintaining the supply of projectiles and propellant charges necessary for sustained fire. The vehicle carried 69 rounds of 10.5mm ammunition internally, a substantial load that enabled the crew to execute fire missions without immediate resupply. Additional ammunition could be carried externally or transported by support vehicles as tactical situations dictated. The power plant was a Continental R975 radial engine, generating 340 horsepower, the same dependable engine that powered numerous American armored vehicles throughout the war. This engine provided the M7 with a maximum road speed of approximately 26 miles per hour on favorable surfaces. Although actual tactical movement speeds varied considerably depending on terrain, weather, and the prevailing tactical situation, the critical capability was not its maximum velocity, but its inherent ability to move under its own power immediately after firing. The howitzer itself retained the ballistic characteristics of its towed counterpart. It could fire high explosive shells to a maximum range of approximately 11,000 yards, just over 6 miles. While effective range fluctuated with ammunition type, elevation, and atmospheric conditions, the gun could be elevated from -5 degrees to +35 degrees, offering the high-angle fire typical of howitzers while still retaining the capacity to engage targets at relatively flat trajectories when required. The rate of fire was entirely dependent on crew proficiency and ammunition availability, but well-trained crews could sustain 3 to 4 rounds per minute for extended periods. What truly distinguished the M7 in its tactical deployment was not any groundbreaking characteristic of the gun itself, but rather the seamless integration of the weapon with a mobile platform capable of executing what American artillerymen termed shoot and scoot tactics. The vehicle could halt, the crew could lay the gun on target using standard fire direction procedures, fire the required number of rounds, and then drive away to a new position before enemy counterfire could be accurately directed against the firing emplacement. The entire sequence, from arriving at a firing position to departing after completing a fire mission, could be executed in under 3 minutes by experienced crews operating under tactical conditions. The German artillery units operating in Normandy during June of 1944 found themselves confronting tactical realities that grew increasingly unfavorable with each passing day since the invasion commenced. The equation was brutally simple: locate the enemy gun, calculate the firing solution, communicate orders, execute the fire mission, and hope the target remained stationary long enough for the shells to arrive. Against traditional towed artillery, this sequence was effective. Against the M7 Priest, however, it failed with a consistent and demoralizing regularity. Hartmann's artillery regiment, the artillery battalion attached to the 921st Grenadier Regiment, operated primarily with the 10 5mm leFH-18 light field howitzer and the heavier 15mm SFH-18 medium howitzer. These were proven weapons that had served effectively across multiple theaters. The crews knew their guns intimately, could execute fire missions with admirable speed, and maintain their equipment despite escalating shortages of spare parts and lubricants. What they could not do, however, was move those guns quickly enough to be effective in counterbattery duels against self-propelled artillery. The leFH-18 weighed approximately 4,200 pounds in its traveling configuration. When limbered to its two-wheeled carriage, movement necessitated either a half-track prime mover or a 6-horse team, neither of which could be brought into action instantaneously. The process of preparing for movement began with ceasing fire and securing the gun. The crew had to close the breech, secure all loose equipment, attach the limber, and connect the prime mover or hitch the horses. Only then could movement commence. Upon reaching a new position, the entire process reversed: unhitching, unlimbering, leveling the gun using the trail spades, establishing sight lines, and preparing ammunition for firing. German training manuals stipulated that well-drilled crews could execute this maneuver in approximately 15 minutes under training conditions. Combat conditions invariably extended this timeline. Terrain obstacles, enemy fire, communication delays, and the sheer chaos of battlefield circumstances meant that actual displacement times frequently exceeded 20 or even 30 minutes, from the last round fired in one position to the first round fired from the new location. During this interval, the gun was entirely vulnerable and utterly useless for its primary purpose. American self-propelled artillery largely eliminated this protracted sequence. The gun was already integrated onto its mobile platform. The crew remained with the vehicle. Movement simply required the driver to start the engine and drive away. There was no limbering, No hitching, no complex mechanical evolutions that consumed precious time and exposed crews to danger. The tactical implications were profound and became increasingly apparent to German artillery officers struggling to suppress American fire support. The German army did possess its own self-propelled artillery, most notably the Wespe and Hummel vehicles, which mounted 10 5mm and 15mm howitzers, respectively, on modified Panzer chassis. These vehicles demonstrated that German designers grasped the concept and possessed the technical capability to produce similar designs. However, production numbers revealed a stark disparity in industrial capacity and military priorities. German industry produced approximately 682 Wespe vehicles during the entire war and roughly 714 Hummel vehicles. In contrast, American factories manufactured over 4,000 M7 priests between April of 1942 and February of 1945, with production peaking at several hundred vehicles monthly during 1943. This numerical disparity meant that American field artillery battalions could be equipped entirely with self-propelled guns, while German artillery remained predominantly towed. In Normandy, American armored divisions typically included 3 battalions of self-propelled 10 5mm howitzers, totaling 54 guns, while infantry divisions incorporated a mix of towed and self-propelled artillery, depending on unit organization and equipment availability. German divisions facing them operated primarily with towed guns that required horse teams, increasingly substituting for motor transport as fuel shortages worsened. Forward observers like Hartmann comprehended these realities through direct observation rather than detached staff briefings. They witnessed American artillery positions materialize, deliver their fire missions, and vanish before German counterfire could arrive. They meticulously called in accurate coordinates based on sound, flash, and smoke observation, only to learn that German shells had impacted empty fields. This pattern repeated with demoralizing consistency throughout the Normandy campaign and continued into the subsequent fighting across France and into Germany itself. The 30-second window, which dictated survival, was not officially codified in any tactical manual Hartmann had studied, but it emerged from accumulated experience. 30 seconds represented approximately the minimum time required for a forward observer to identify an American firing position, communicate its coordinates via field telephone or radio to his battery, and have that information processed and relayed to German guns. Even under ideal conditions, with excellent communications and responsive fire direction, this sequence consumed valuable time. Add the flight time of German shells, which varied with range but typically lasted 30 to 60 seconds for medium-range fire missions, and the total elapsed time from an American gun firing to German shells arriving approached 90 seconds, or 2 minutes. The organizational structure that supported German counterbattery operations in Normandy had been designed for a different form of warfare. Intelligence officers meticulously collected reports from forward observers, evaluated their accuracy and importance, correlated multiple reports to triangulate enemy positions, assigned priority targets, and issued fire missions to available batteries. This methodical approach functioned effectively when enemy artillery remained predictable and stationary. It failed utterly when the enemy refused to conform to these assumptions. Oberst Heinrich Müller commanded the artillery regiment supporting the 275th Infantry Division during the fighting south of Carentan in mid-June of 1944. His after-action reports, preserved in German military archives, detail the profound frustration of attempting to execute counter-battery fire against an adversary whose mobility far outstripped the response time of German fire direction procedures. Müller noted that his forward observers consistently provided accurate initial reports of American artillery positions, but by the time German guns could engage these locations, observation posts reported that the American guns had already relocated. The communication infrastructure itself exacerbated the problem. German artillery relied heavily on field telephone lines for communication between forward observers, fire direction centers, and gun batteries. These wire lines were inherently vulnerable to shell fire, required constant maintenance, and introduced delays as messages were relayed through multiple stations. Radio communications did exist, but remained less prevalent in German artillery units compared to their American counterparts, partly due to equipment shortages and partly due to a doctrinal preference for more secure wire communications. American artillery battalions operated under different organizational principles that emphasized decentralized control and rapid response. Fire direction centers were positioned in close proximity to gun batteries, thereby minimizing communication delays. Forward observers possessed direct radio communication with fire direction officers who could authorize fire missions without routing requests through multiple command echelons. The entire system prioritized speed of response over centralized control, accepting some degree of coordination efficiency for dramatic improvements in reaction time. The tactical deployment of M7 priests mirrored this organizational philosophy. American artillery doctrine mandated that self-propelled guns operate from positions that facilitated rapid displacement along pre-planned routes. Crews would scout multiple firing positions before missions commenced, identify covered routes between these positions, and rehearse displacement procedures so that movement became routine rather than an exceptional undertaking. Fire missions were planned to allow guns to fire and then displace before counterbattery fire could arrive, accepting that this mobility might sometimes entail firing fewer rounds per mission than guns remaining in fixed positions. German observers witnessed this unfolding situation with escalating apprehension. American ordnance would appear, discharge between 6 and 12 projectiles, and then disappear. German endeavors to pinpoint and engage these firing emplacements invariably proved too tardy. This recurring scenario played out across all fronts where American and German artillery units engaged each other, from the hedgerows of Normandy through the subsequent breakout maneuvers and the pursuit across France. German artillery commanders recognized they were confronting not simply superior materiel, but a holistic operational framework that integrated mobility, communication networks, fire coordination protocols, and battlefield deployment into a strategy that German forces were incapable of effectively repelling. The psychological toll on German artillery crews extended beyond mere vexation at tactical futility. These were seasoned combatants who took immense pride in their technical acumen and their capacity to provide robust support to infantry operations. The dawning realization that their meticulously honed proficiencies and well-maintained armaments were insufficient to achieve their primary mission against an adversary that could simply evade danger fundamentally challenged their professional identities and eroded their confidence in their ability to shape battlefield outcomes. The tangible evidence of American material preeminence became undeniable to German servicemen as the Normandy campaign progressed through June and July of 1944. Hartmann and his fellow forward spotters occupied positions affording them direct visual reconnaissance of American artillery deployments when terrain and tactical circumstances allowed. What they observed directly contradicted years of doctrine that underscored German technical and organizational supremacy over adversaries presumed to rely on crude mass production rather than sophisticated engineering. The M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers that Hartmann observed operated with a mechanical dependability that German vehicles increasingly lacked. These units moved repeatedly throughout each operational day, shifted between firing locations, navigated challenging terrain, and maintained combat readiness without the breakdowns that plagued German vehicles suffering from insufficient maintenance, compromised component materials, and a dearth of replacement parts. American mechanics serviced their vehicles utilizing genuine spare components, facilitated by a logistical network that functioned with remarkable consistency, despite the immense demands of sustaining large-scale combat operations across vast oceanic supply routes. German intelligence officers compiled detailed technical assessments of captured American materiel, including several M7 priests that fell into German hands during localized counterattacks and engagements within the bocage. These reports, now preserved in military archives, illuminated German evaluations of American design philosophies and manufacturing standards. Technical assessment teams noted the robust construction evident throughout American vehicles, the utilization of high-grade materials in critical components, and design elements that simplified field servicing and repairs. The Continental radial engine powering the M7 proved particularly impressive to German evaluators, who were acutely aware of the persistent reliability issues afflicting German tank and vehicle engines during 1944. The Continental R97.5 demonstrated consistent performance across extended operational periods, tolerated field maintenance conditions, and exhibited resilience against the minor failures that progressively diminished the availability of German vehicles. German assessments attributed this reliability partly to superior metallurgy and engine components, and partly to American access to adequate lubricants and high-octane fuel, commodities that German forces found increasingly scarce. The ammunition supply underpinning American artillery operations presented another stark disparity that German observers could not overlook. American gun crews expended ammunition at rates that appeared profligate to German artillerymen operating under increasingly stringent shell rationing. While German batteries might receive authorization to fire 50 or 100 rounds over an entire day's operations, American battalions unleashed thousands of projectiles in support of even minor tactical undertakings. Forward observers like Hartmann would call for fire missions and witness American artillery respond within minutes, delivering barrages of dozens or hundreds of shells that saturated target areas with high explosive and white phosphorus munitions. This disparity directly reflected the industrial capacity and logistical infrastructure supporting American endeavors. American manufacturing facilities produced artillery ammunition in quantities measured in millions of rounds monthly. The logistical apparatus transported this ammunition from American plants across the Atlantic Ocean to French shores and forward supply depots with such efficiency that frontline units seldom experienced shortages severe enough to impede fire missions. German ammunition output, though substantial despite Allied aerial bombardment, could not rival American production, and was increasingly hampered by transportation challenges as Allied air supremacy disrupted rail networks throughout occupied Europe. The tactical ramifications became evident in every engagement where American and German forces clashed. American infantry could request artillery support and receive immediate reinforcement with overwhelming firepower that neutralized German defensive positions. German infantry seeking artillery assistance encountered delays, received fewer rounds, and understood that ammunition constraints necessitated the careful rationing of fire missions rather than their unfettered availability. The psychological impact of this disparity influenced combat effectiveness in ways that transcended mere material calculations. German soldiers learned they could not depend on their artillery to match American fire support, while American soldiers operated with the assurance that overwhelming firepower was perpetually accessible when required. Lieutenant Klaus Hartmann survived the Normandy campaign, although his unit did not remain intact through the hostilities that ensued after the American breakout from the beachhead in late July of 1944. The 921st Grenadier Regiment sustained catastrophic losses during Operation Cobra, the massive American offensive that shattered German defensive lines south of St. Lo and opened the path for armored exploitation deep into Brittany and toward Paris. Hartmann's final combat dispatches, filed during the chaotic withdrawal through central France in August, continued to highlight the impossibility of effective counterbattery fire against American self-propelled artillery that would displace before German shells could reach their targets. The pattern that Hartmann meticulously documented in Normandy was replicated across every subsequent theater where German forces encountered American artillery. During the Lorraine campaign in the autumn of 1944, German defenders attempting to hold the Metz fortress complex faced American artillery that provided overwhelming fire support for advancing infantry while remaining virtually impervious to counter-battery fire. In the Battle of the Bulge during December, German artillery achieved temporary tactical success through surprise and concentrated fire during the initial assault. However, as American forces regrouped and mounted counterattacks, self-propelled artillery once again provided mobile fire support that German towed guns could not suppress. The tactical adjustments attempted by German forces revealed the fundamental insolubility of this problem within existing resource and doctrinal limitations. Some German artillery units experimented with extremely rapid fire sequences, arriving at a position, firing as swiftly as possible, and then displacing immediately. However, towed guns simply could not match the displacement velocity of self-propelled vehicles. Other units attempted to engage American artillery during its movement rather than after identifying firing positions, but this necessitated foreknowledge of movement routes and consumed ammunition in speculative engagements against potential targets. The production of German self-propelled artillery saw a marginal increase during 1944, as military planners acknowledged the significance of mobile fire support. Nevertheless, industrial capacity and resource allocation never reached the levels required to equip artillery regiments predominantly with self-propelled weaponry. The Wespe and Hummel vehicles that did reach frontline units performed commendably when operational, affording German forces capabilities comparable to American self-propelled artillery. However, their numerical scarcity meant these vehicles remained exceptions rather than standard issue. Most German artillery battalions continued to operate with towed guns, pulled by increasingly scarce motor transport or by horse teams, a decidedly anachronistic vulnerability on mechanized battlefields. The doctrinal implications extended beyond artillery deployment to fundamental questions regarding the conduct of modern industrialized warfare. The American approach embraced somewhat higher vehicle weight and complexity in exchange for enhanced mobility and survivability, representing a philosophical commitment to safeguarding trained personnel and maintaining equipment readiness through designs that facilitated maintenance and repair. German doctrine had traditionally emphasized maximum operational performance and minimal weight, accepting reduced durability and increased maintenance demands as acceptable compromises for superior tactical attributes. By 1944, the consequences of these divergent philosophies had become starkly apparent. American vehicles maintained high operational availability rates, despite intensive combat utilization, owing to their robust construction that tolerated abuse and a comprehensive logistical network that supplied parts and maintenance support. German vehicles delivered impressive performance when operational, but suffered progressively severe availability issues as maintenance demands outstripped available resources and substitute materials compromised reliability. The 30-second rule, which governed German survival against American artillery, symbolized a broader recognition that German military effectiveness was eroding across multiple fronts simultaneously. German artillery officers writing in the aftermath of the war consistently cited American material superiority, particularly in self-propelled artillery, ammunition supply, and fire direction systems, as decisive elements that German tactical skill and operational competence could not surmount. These assessments, divested of wartime propaganda and written with the hindsight of defeat, conceded that American artillery doctrine and equipment represented sophisticated resolutions to genuine tactical challenges, rather than a mere reliance on industrial mass production. The professional deference implicit in these post-war evaluations stood in sharp contrast to wartime propaganda, which had characterized American military capabilities as technically inferior to German standards. The human cost of this tactical disparity, while not precisely quantifiable, was substantial and tragic. German infantry operating without adequate artillery support endured higher casualties during assaults and faced greater difficulties holding defensive positions against American advances, which were bolstered by overwhelming firepower. German artillery crews, attempting to fulfill their mission against an adversary they could not effectively engage, experienced the psychological trauma of professional inadequacy. They understood their duty, possessed the technical skill to execute it, yet lacked the material and resources essential for success. These psychological burdens compounded the physical perils of combat operations conducted under conditions of comprehensive material disadvantage. The production statistics governing the artillery war in Europe during 1944 and 1945 revealed disparities so extreme they bordered on the surreal. The United States produced over 4,000 M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers during the war, alongside thousands of additional self-propelled units mounting 75mm guns, 155mm howitzers, and other calibers. This production occurred concurrently with the manufacture of tens of thousands of towed artillery pieces, millions of rounds of ammunition, thousands of tanks and other armored vehicles, and the vast array of equipment necessary to support mechanized military operations across multiple theaters on different continents. German industry, despite remarkable efforts to sustain production under Allied strategic bombing, manufactured fewer than 500 Wespe and Hummel self-propelled artillery vehicles combined throughout the entire war. This figure represents approximately one-third of American production of just the M7 Priest, without accounting for other American self-propelled artillery types. This numerical disparity underscored fundamental differences in industrial capacity, resource availability, and the ability to sustain mass production of complex military equipment while simultaneously prosecuting a multi-front conflict. The ammunition production figures presented an even more sobering narrative. American factories manufactured artillery ammunition in quantities measured in the hundreds of millions of rounds during the war years. German output, while significant, could not approach American levels and suffered progressive decline as Allied bombing disrupted transportation networks and damaged production facilities. By 1944, German artillery units operated under ammunition rationing that severely constrained their capacity to execute fire missions, whereas American units expended ammunition with relative freedom, limited primarily by logistical throughput rather than production deficits. The logistical infrastructure supporting these production figures exemplified another critical American advantage. The United States developed and maintained a global logistics network that transported millions of tons of supplies across oceanic distances, landed them on hostile shores, and delivered them to frontline units with such reliability that American forces rarely encountered critical shortages of essential items. This logistical prowess represented decades of institutional development, substantial infrastructure investment, and sophisticated organizational management, capabilities that German forces could not replicate, even under optimal circumstances. German logistics, effective over European distances, and when operating from established rail infrastructure, deteriorated rapidly as Allied air power decimated transportation networks and advancing fronts moved beyond the reach of functioning railways. Horse-drawn transport, which had consistently supplemented motor transport in German logistics, became increasingly dominant as fuel shortages worsened and vehicles broke down faster than they could be repaired. The spectacle of German artillery being towed by horses while American guns moved under their own power epitomized the technological disparity that defined the conflict's final phase. The 30-second rule, which German soldiers had come to depend on, signified more than a tactical challenge posed by self-propelled artillery. It symbolized the comprehensive material disadvantage German forces faced across every facet of modern industrialized warfare. Superior individual training, tactical proficiency, and operational skill could achieve localized successes and inflict disproportionate casualties under favorable circumstances, but could not overcome the systemic advantages derived by American forces from their industrial capacity, abundant resources, technological sophistication, and organizational efficiency. German military professionals recognized these realities with increasing clarity as the war inexorably moved toward its conclusion. This recognition did not translate into effective remedies, as the problems were systemic and strategic rather than tactical and operational. Germany could not instantaneously generate the industrial capacity it lacked, nor access resources beyond its purview, and it could not cultivate in mere months organizational capabilities that required years to establish. The war's outcome was dictated by these fundamental imbalances rather than by tactical innovations or battlefield heroism, however impressive individual acts might have been. Post-war analyses of artillery effectiveness in the European theater confirmed what frontline soldiers like Hartmann had experienced firsthand. American artillery provided more responsive fire support, delivered greater volumes of ordnance, and operated with higher survivability than German artillery throughout the campaign, from Normandy to the Elbe River. Self-propelled artillery was not the sole determinant of this superiority. American advantages in ammunition supply, communication equipment, and fire direction protocols all contributed significantly, but the mobility of platforms like the M7 Priest represented a critical capability that German forces could neither match nor effectively counter. The legacy of the M7 Priest extended far beyond its immediate tactical impact in World War II. The vehicle established operational paradigms and validated design principles that influenced artillery development throughout the Cold War and into contemporary military engagements. The fundamental understanding that artillery mobility and survivability were as crucial as range and firepower became an axiom in post-war military thinking across multiple nations. Modern, self-propelled artillery continues to embody the lessons initially demonstrated by vehicles like the M7 operating in the fields of Normandy during that summer of 1944. The Soviet Union, observing American artillery operations during the war and capturing numerous examples of American materiel, developed extensive families of self-propelled artillery that equipped its mechanized forces throughout the Cold War era. Soviet designs, such as the 2S-1 and 2S-3 self-propelled howitzers, embodied the same operational concepts pioneered by the M7, mounting powerful guns on tracked chassis that could fire and rapidly displace to evade counterbattery fire. The widespread adoption of self-propelled artillery across global militaries signified an acknowledgement that the tactical problems confronted by Hartmann in Normandy were inherent to modern warfare rather than specific to the circumstances of 1944. The United States military continued to develop and refine self-propelled artillery through successive generations of vehicles that progressively enhanced the M7's capabilities. The M109 self-propelled howitzer, which entered service in the 1960s and remained operational into the 21st century, represents a direct lineage from wartime vehicles like the M7 Priest. Contemporary American artillery systems, such as the M119A7 Paladin, incorporate advanced fire control computers, automated gun-laying systems, and sophisticated communication technologies that would have seemed fantastical to the crews operating M7s in France. Yet, the fundamental operational principle remains unchanged. Fire accurately, displace rapidly, survive to fire again. The human narrative at the core of this technical evolution warrants final contemplation. Klaus Hartmann, taking cover in that ruined farmhouse south of Carentan, counting seconds and hoping his coordinates would prove consequential this time, represented countless soldiers who faced the material realities of industrialized warfare with courage and professionalism, despite understanding the mathematical improbability of survival. The 30 seconds he learned to count were not merely a tactical consideration, but a metric of how profoundly the material underpinnings of warfare had shifted beneath traditional military virtues of training, discipline, and tactical skill. The uncomfortable truth that emerged from the Norman hedgerows in June of 1944 was that modern warfare had fundamentally become industrialized before it was tactical. The side capable of producing more armaments, delivering greater quantities of ammunition, maintaining higher equipment availability, and replacing losses more swiftly would prevail, irrespective of individual soldier quality or tactical proficiency. This era fundamentally altered the perception of valor and proficiency, rendering them less impactful in the grand scheme. While individual acts of bravery or tactical acumen retained significance in the immediate skirmishes, the ultimate trajectory of conflicts was increasingly dictated by industrial might and logistical prowess, factors far beyond the control of any single combatant. Hartmann, fortunate enough to survive the hostilities, reintegrated into civilian life in Germany. There, during the extensive period of rebuilding, he pursued a career as a structural engineer. His wartime journals, subsequently entrusted to military archives in the 1970s, contain meticulous accounts of artillery spotting and strategic evaluations. These records have proven invaluable to scholars seeking to reconstruct the day-to-day experiences of German forward spotters engaging American units. The accuracy of his observations and the evident professional competence displayed in his reports serve as a powerful testament to the caliber of German military professionalism, even when confronted with the challenges of an M7 Priest artillery piece firing from a hidden position north of Carentan on June 15, 1944. This specific vehicle, lost to the anonymity of historical records, was merely one among thousands of virtually identical machines engaged in comparable missions throughout the European theater of operations. Its crew members, their identities unrecorded in any readily accessible historical sources for researchers 8 decades later, remain unknown. The vehicle itself likely endured the war and was eventually dismantled during the post-war demilitarization efforts, its metal repurposed for civilian uses. Nevertheless, the tactical paradigm it embodied, where mobility translated to survival, movement served as defense, and industrial capacity emerged as the ultimate strategic determinant, profoundly shaped military doctrines for subsequent generations, and continues to inform contemporary approaches to military organization, armament, and artillery deployment in current global engagements. The brief 30 seconds that German troops had to react after an M7 Priest discharged its round represented far more than a simple countdown to imminent peril. These seconds encapsulated the chasm between theoretical military principles and practical realities, between traditional martial virtues and the stark, quantifiable certainties of industrialized warfare, and between the expectations instilled in soldiers and the limitations imposed by material circumstances. Grasping this disparity necessitates confronting the sobering truth that the victors of wars are ultimately determined not by sheer bravery or individual skill, though both are undeniably crucial, but by a nation's industrial infrastructure, its access to resources, and its organizational effectiveness, operating at scales that dwarf human comprehension. The soldiers who fought and perished while coming to terms with these harsh realities deserve commemoration, not solely for their ultimate sacrifice, but for the profound and brutal lessons their experiences impart regarding the fundamental nature of modern combat. Thank you for joining us. For more in-depth historical analyses, please explore the other videos presented on your screen at this moment.